proving you've been vaccinated. Is it a public health question or invasion of your privacy? A bill headed to the governor's desk comes down on one side of that question. Plus, Kansas takes the lead in stolen identities. A lot of fingers now pointing at the Department of Labor. And the battle over an extra $300 a week in unemployment. Is it enough to keep you home from work? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. As some states across the country decide to end the extra federal unemployment benefits, Kansas governor is indicating we will not. State GOP leaders are pushing back, led by Senator Roger Marshall. Rebecca Chung of the KSN Capitol Bureau takes a look at why.
For now, the governor says the state will not be ending federal unemployment benefits, but there's been pushback from some GOP leaders to end these programs early, saying they're stopping people from getting back to work. Thousands of unemployed Kansans struggling through the pandemic.
I had to go to my church pantry for food.
There's got to be a solution to the problem.
Some Republican congressmen say they have the answer, though. Get a job. A specific push from Kansas U.S. Senator Roger Marshall to end the extra $300 payments from federal extensions. What would you say to Kansans that are struggling and are relying on these federal unemployment benefits?
I would say that there's 8 million jobs that are open across the country now, and certainly a large number in Kansas.
Dozens of Kansas businesses in dire need of help.
I still need a few more people, especially as we get busier.
Several GOP-led states are ending the federal programs early, but Governor Laura Kelly says Kansas won't. Marshall now firing back at the governor's move.
If the governor would go out and talk to businesses, talk to Kansans, she would quickly understand that the number one impediment to this economy growing is getting people back to work.
Meanwhile, some Kansans are still waiting for unemployment payments. The state's labor office reporting more than 16,000 people in the backlog for one of the federal programs, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. At the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And here to discuss this and more today, we have State Representative Stephanie Byers, a Wichita Democrat, joining me on set. And joining us by Zoom, State Representative Susan Humphreys, a Wichita Republican. Welcome to both of you. And Susan, since I'm looking at you, we're going to start with you, member of the Republican supermajority in the Kansas House. We have one more day left, sine die, in this year's legislative session. Is there something the legislature might do to push the governor on this issue?
I don't think we can push the governor on this issue at this point, but I do hope that she would consider what the other states are doing. I think it's wise. You know, I have had businesses in my own district close because they can't find enough people to work, and closing businesses is not the way to get our economy going. I would like to say anyone who's due back benefits, yes, we need to pay those. Those are the people who we're getting emails from every day. We need to get those paid. But going forward, let's get people back to work. And I can see how that extra $300 might deter them from looking for that job when there are plenty of them out there.
And Stephanie, you're a member of the governor's party. What's your take on the reason for keeping the extra federal funds in place right now?
One thing, we need to provide that hope for those folks that are still out there that haven't gotten it. So we make sure that we've got the money there so they realize they continue working what we do. We will get that PUC caught up with them and get them going. The other thing we're looking at too is what are we looking at as far as a livable wage goes? Are we offering jobs that will pay people what they need to be able to make ends meet? And I think that's where our focus needs to be as we're looking at trying to get this economy going again, is not just the businesses open and jobs fulfilled, but jobs that provide people with a livable wage so they can continue to do what they need to do to make their lives worthwhile.
Susan, any thoughts on that? I'm hearing that a lot of the jobs that are opening up right now are actually very low paying.
That could be true, but I think someone with ambition, they can start with that. They can go forward. I don't think if we're talking about raising the minimum wage, I think studies show that in the end doesn't really help it. More people don't become employed because of that. So, you know, that I wouldn't be in favor of, but I am in favor of people getting their back pay and then going out and finding maybe something new or trying something different.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about Department of Labor here in a few minutes. So I'm going to skip my next question on that and move to our next topic real quick, which kind of goes into what we've been speaking about. Families I spoke with earlier this week told me unemployment is not what's keeping them out of the workplace. It's childcare costs and pay rates.
our fellow human beings in the community and in the state of Kansas think that we're like lazy people.
Amy's husband, John, got laid off from his aviation job last year because of the pandemic. He made $24 an hour. She was a stay-at-home mom caring for their kids and cousins. Their unemployment ran out in December.
Hey, it's a really good thing that we had retirement benefits that we could pull from. A lot of people don't have that.
They say he's looked for jobs but can't find anything that will pay enough to pay the bills.
I know we wouldn't be able to make bills on $9 an hour.
Jeremy Hill, a jobs forecaster at Wichita State University, says many Kansans are facing the same problem.
They don't match the labor market. It actually is a shift downwards, but they have family households to take care of, and so shifting down doesn't match that family.
He says that's especially an issue in the retail and restaurant industries, which have traded high-paying jobs at full-service stores for minimum wage positions at places like Walmart and McDonald's. And while some would say low pay is better than no pay, Hill says that's before you include the cost of childcare, something that was a problem even before the pandemic.
There were plants, manufacturing plants across Kansas that had to completely do some pauses and shutdowns because they couldn't have enough daycare.
Because we have kids to take care of and we can't afford childcare because childcare is just outrageous.
Not to mention, John is at the top of the callback list for his previous employer, something they still hope will happen sometime this summer.
He's gotten a couple of interviews, but nobody wants to hire somebody who even thinks about having another job coming back to.
And a couple of quick notes there. Amy and John that I spoke with in that story did not want to share their full names, and obviously we didn't show their faces because they didn't want to jeopardize the chance to return to that job that he's hoping to have later this summer. And another issue there too, when I talked with Jeremy Hill in this story, he said that it's really going to end up being companies that are going to have to be more flexible when it comes to time slots, hybrid working situations, that sort of thing, and also more pay, which is something that you mentioned.
Absolutely. When we start looking at that livable wage, that just makes a tremendous difference. For years, we've had people that have worked at the poverty level or underneath it and more than one job at a time just trying to survive. The pandemic has put us in a place where we have a catalyst. We have an opportunity to change the way that we do things. We can put more focus in on how we supply that labor need and how we do it in such a way that it gives people the dignity and the life that they need to be able to survive in the world we live in.
And of course, the other issue raised in that story is childcare costs. And Susan, I know that deregulation is something that Republicans in general support. And when I spoke with Jeremy Hill, he talked about the regulations in the childcare industry that make it so expensive. Are there things the Kansas legislature might be able to do in the next year or so to help with that problem?
Specifically on childcare, I'm not privy to that. I'm not sure, but I would say we did at the very end put money in extra scholarships, the Kansas Comprehensive Grant, so that people with a need can do that. I agree with Stephanie that some creative work environment, home, hybrid, different hours, job sharing, all of those things are really important. And might someone be able to go back to school? We also did some scholarships to technical colleges, evaluating what are the top 10 technical jobs that we need in the state of Kansas. We went through that. So I do think there's ways that we can encourage people to go for those higher paying jobs, maybe at the same time going back to school while they're doing their same job at the moment. Yeah, we want to encourage that. And I love that creativity and flexibility.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about all those scholarships, that same day I did that story, I spoke with a woman who is changing her career entirely. She's going back to school to become a nurse. There is a Wall Street Journal article this week saying that a lot of the worker shortage we're seeing right now is actually a case of workers reassessing and looking for different career lines at this point.
Absolutely. And again, we're looking at people who are saying, how can I make a living that will keep me employed and keep me doing what I need to do, but also having that opportunity to do maybe something that I've really always wanted to do, but I was in some sort of economic straits where I had to continue working just to survive. And so now we have that opportunity to make those changes and move forward. It's interesting because when we looked at expanding Medicaid, we realized that Medicaid wasn't just about healthcare, it was also about creating a job market, about giving opportunities for people to retrain, to move into the medical field, and having that here in Kansas to expand that job ability as well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the issues, of course, with this go back to the unemployment issues that we were talking about earlier in the show. And there are a lot of problems with the unemployment checks in Kansas, and all of those can be traced back to ID theft. Now, Kansas is leading the nation in stolen identities. As KSN's Alexis Padilla shows us, many are blaming the pandemic.
Like, what in the world had my name on it, my address on it? And so I opened it.
Inside, Dixie Martin found this letter from the Kansas Department of Labor.
It said I had worked for some place that I'd never worked for, in a town that I'd never lived in, and had like almost $30,000 in it.
She is one of more than 38,000 Kansans who reported having their identity stolen for benefits in 2020.
There was an incredible number of fraudulent unemployment claims going on. I had 4 filed on me.
According to the Federal Trade Commission, Kansas had the most reports of identity theft in the U.S. last year. Attorney General Derek Schmidt is not shocked by Kansas's ranking, saying, quote, "Millions of these bogus claims have been attempted and many thousands have been paid, resulting in the loss of millions of taxpayer dollars. It is distressing, but not surprising." Kansas had 4 of the top 5 metro areas with the highest cases, Wichita included. So how can you protect yourself?
Most of it has to do with your security on the internet. If you're leaving a lot of information public, there's a lot of things that we can find out about a person just off of a public Facebook profile.
And be cautious of your logins.
They want to use one username and one password for everything. That's how we get in trouble.
And I gotta say, that's something I am totally guilty of there. Susan, I know that every lawmaker I have spoken with this year has said they've been getting emails ad nauseum from folks who are struggling with the Department of Labor. Where do we really stand with helping folks get the money that they're hoping to get and dealing with this massive fraud problem right now?
Thank you. Well, I do think it's getting better. I think I've gotten 2 or 3 emails even today from the Department of Labor saying, okay, I've dealt with that issue. But every day we get emails from people saying either my fraud hasn't been taken care of, I haven't gotten my new forms, or they haven't gotten their unemployment. And so I just want to say too, that last thing when he said about being careful with our passwords, yes, of course we need to be careful, but I don't think Kansans were necessarily more careless with their passwords than every other state. I think what happened was until February the 2nd, we didn't have software in place in our Department of Labor to catch all that fraud, and it became maybe worldwide a banner. Okay, Kansas is the place to go if you would like to, file fraudulent claims. And on February 8th, we got a letter that said between February 2nd, when they installed the software, and February 8th, they had blocked over 1 million fraudulent claims in that time period. Well, how many was that before February 2nd? That was the problem. Now we're catching them, but we've paid out, the governor says $300 million in claims fraudulently. We think it's upwards to $600 million. That's taxpayer money. And that's money that's gone. And it's been a disaster. I feel like we are on a better track now, and they seem to be taking care of it, but it's very distressing what happened with the Department of Labor.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody who isn't distressed by what happened with the Department of Labor. What about you, Stephanie? Are you starting to see a change in the tenor of the emails involving the Department of Labor? Are they getting better at this point?
My constituents seem to be having an easier time with it. We're even getting some of those thank you notes that come in and say that, my problem's been solved. I want to appreciate you for the efforts you've done. I think one of the things that we're running into, though, is that we're dealing still with an antique computer system. We know in 2008 there was modernization put in place to bring KDOL up to modern standards, and then a previous governor at one point in time canceled that. And so we're still struggling as we get caught up. I have friends that their hobby is antique computing. And to them, it's amazing that we're dealing with an advanced system such as we do, and so integrated as Department of Labor through a system that was built in 1977. So as we move forward and we see more and more modernization with Governor Kelly's opportunities to put like $40 million in for a modernization of the system, we should see even better responses to this and even more deflection of those fraud attempts.
Yeah. And I know that there is a modernization committee that's going to be start meeting soon, working with the Department of Labor on that. But in the meantime, Susan, as we look at the fraud issues, I know that the U.S. attorney here in the Wichita area said they had to almost set up an entirely separate division just to handle the fraud issues out of the Department of Labor. Do you have any feel for what that is like? Are they starting to get a handle on prosecutions at all?
As far as I know, I don't know that they've been able to move forward with the prosecutions. I've heard that a lot of the activity was not on our shores, that it was overseas. And so, of course, that's going to be impossible. It's just, they're experts at what they were doing, the fraudulent, with the fraud. And so they knew what they were doing and how to, I think money was put into bank accounts. Those accounts were immediately closed. Really hard to follow. I know they're doing the best job that they can do. And then one other thing about the antiquated system, I agree with that. We put 40 million in. The legislature appropriated that money. The governor suggested it, and we did do that. But also want to say, I don't think it was the beginning of March when they extended their hours to 5 days a week and go to 9 o'clock at night. There's more that we could have done. I do think we're on a better track now, and I appreciate that. And but I just feel for my constituents and others across the state that have had trouble with it.
And of course, a lot of fallout from all of that. One of them being a lot of folks getting 1099s for their taxes related to fraudulent claims in their name. And I know the legislature passed a bill that incorporated some relief for that.
Absolutely, because we realize that fraud does happen, and we want to make sure that our constituents are taken care of the best we possibly can.
Yeah. And so that basically, if you get one of those fraudulent 1099s, you are no longer responsible for filing for taxes on that.
I would trust your tax preparer to help you with that, to make sure they got it right.
Yes, definitely, because the laws are changing all the time. All right, well, we've got one other debate dividing the state, whether or not to allow the use of vaccine passports, cards proving you've been vaccinated against COVID-19. The state legislature decided last weekend to ban them, at least for government buildings and services here in Kansas, as Cake's Eli Higgins shows us.
To the polio age, right? We're in our 60s, so if this had been nonsense, and we'd still have polio.
For that to be required, I think maybe tips the lines of what the government can and can't do.
Being required to have proof of a vaccination is nothing new, but the term vaccine passport has become a hot topic as we continue navigating through the pandemic. Wichita residents like Joe and Pam Barrientos are all for it.
They require you to carry ID, right? A driver's license, which is only valid in this particular state at this particular time. What's wrong with having a vaccine passport?
Residents like Adam Jensen disagree.
I'm against it because it's freedom. It's a freedom that I feel like you're taking away from me.
Friday, the state passed this $28 billion budget, which includes language specifically on vaccine passports, banning them from being required to enter a state government building or to receive services.
It's been happening for 60, 70 years. The health department's tracking this stuff. This is just the first time in a pandemic that has been politicized.
I don't agree that we should be mandated to do anything in that regard.
While Barrientos and Jensen have different opinions on the idea of vaccine passports, they share the same hope.
It'd be good if we could all get on the same page and fight for the right thing, which is to conquer the pandemic and get everything back running.
My hope as we move forward is that we get a good grasp on what's going on and what just everybody come together.
In Wichita, Eli Higgins, Cake News on your side.
And again, this ban only affecting government buildings and public services. It does not affect private businesses. They can still require you to have a vaccine, proof of vaccine to come in. Why that difference? I know there are a lot of Kansans that reached out to me that would have liked to have seen a statewide ban.
You know, I think the thing is we need to move past these Trumpian conspiracies regarding the paranoia involved with this and get to the science what we need to do. We just need to get vaccinated, get people vaccinated. As we were talking before we began broadcasting, 25% only so far. We need to get those numbers up so that way we're taken care of. We know that the health of every individual is taken care of that way.
And Susan, I know as I also speak with other Kansans, a lot of them say, how is a vaccine passport any different from, say, vaccine requirements to go to public schools and requirements that some employers have for certain health issues, TB tests, that sort of thing?
I think they're different. What I've heard from my constituents and others is that this vaccination is still in experimental form. yes, we're encouraging people to get it, but it hasn't actually been approved by the CDC. And so they want to wait. And if they want to wait, to me, that is the biggest issue here, Pilar. So we need to trust the citizens of Kansas to make their own decisions, what is in their own best interest for their health and safety. I think the governor has said that she's not in favor of vaccine passports. It's been surveyed across the state. I think 70%, it was very bipartisan, 70% said they're not in favor of vaccine passports. It seems an infringement on people's rights to have to carry a card around. It's really quite different than, say, traveling to another country that requires a malaria vaccination, for instance.
And yet there are, Stephanie, some countries that will be requiring vaccine passports to enter. I know I have family in Europe, and if we're going to go visit them, which we're hoping to do come this Christmas, we're going to have to prove vaccination.
And I think that goes without saying, whenever we travel into someone else's territory, they set their rules. And if we have to abide by those rules, we have to abide by those rules. But having that vaccine is the most important part, whether it's on a card or not, making sure that you've got yourself taken care of so we can help with everyone else.
So I'm going to ask you one last question on this topic, and I'm going to ask Susan the same one. How do we end the political divide on this issue and get back to it just being a public health issue?
I think that we need to stop talking about wedge issues. We need to move beyond those things that are intentionally set to divide us and start looking at those things that unite us and begin to work together, because we can move forward if we do that.
Susan, same question to you. How do we move away from the political divide on this issue and get back to just talking about it as a public health situation?
Again, I think the main way is that we give people the autonomy to make the decisions themselves. I think that's really following the science. As far as masks go, we know that there's iffy science about that, but we need to let people do what they believe is in their own best interest. But also, I agree with Stephanie that what we need to do is listen to each other. We need to be willing to discuss. We need to have civil discourse. We have a civil discourse group in the legislature where we intentionally try to talk about things. And I think that's great. We had a speaker last week that came and spoke to us, and it was a civil discourse group and the Truth Caucus, which is a conservative group. But we came together to say, you know, how can we advance things? What can we do that's really going to be best for the people of Kansas? So I think it has to do with ask someone out to coffee, see if you can come visit in their office with them. Listen, that's really important.
Yeah. And I know that's been an ongoing issue, or program, I should say, at the State House for the last couple of years. And that's kind of coming to Wichita here. The political divide on everything from masks and passports to voting rights and unemployment benefits, it keeps growing across the nation. But there's one project trying to change that. It's in Wichita and 4 other cities across the country. Kate Spree-Smith explains.
Put strangers across the political divide who've raised their hand and volunteered to do this together, not to talk about politics, but just to talk about their lives.
Dave Isay is the founder of the national movement. He sees the country's political divide as becoming a threat to democracy.
The concern was not that we argue with each other, but that we have more and more started to see people across the divides as less than human.
Wichita was chosen because the demographics here accurately reflect what we see across the country. City Councilman Brandon Johnson says it's his responsibility as an elected official to lead by example.
If we can find a way to just work together, talk to one another, and work on those issues, we'll be better off.
Johnson says Wichita can change the national narrative if we join in and have these powerful conversations.
You begin to see the humanity and maybe not hate the other side. That's one thing that we continue to see in this country growing, is this not necessarily disagreeing, but hating the other side.
Isay knows the project will be an uphill battle, but he's hopeful Wichita can show the country what's possible.
There's much more that we share in common than divides us. And if we spend a little more time listening to each other and a little less time shouting at each other, you know, this country could change.
In Wichita, Bree Smith, Cake News on your side.
So Susan, I'm going to start with you there because you're the one who brought up the civil discourse program at the State House. This sounds to me, at least, as an outsider looking in, very similar to that. What about you?
Very similar, yes. It's we have speakers come in. We typically Well, okay, we haven't been able to meet in person, which I think really puts a damper on things. But when we were meeting in person, we specifically sat with people from the other party at tables, and we drew names out of a hat. Who are you going to go have lunch with? You know, just random. And it was really helpful. And the other thing is we weren't able to have big buffet dinners with the legislators this year, which we always had, you know, Monday through Thursday. There was some dinner we all were invited to. And that's where I found myself sitting down at a table, across the table, someone from the other party saying, hey, what's going on in your committees? Tell me what you've got going on. And that has put, it's really not, and Stephanie, I feel like hasn't had that experience yet. I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to do that next session, because it's made us more separated, because we've gone to dinners, but they've been more private dinners, and they've been people who are probably more along the same spectrum as we are. So I think we just have to push on and get this behind us where we're not able to all be together.
Yeah, and one thing, Susan, that I know a lot of us have talked about on this show, Stephanie as well, is that while there are a lot of big headlines that come out of the legislature that kind of emphasize the divide, the separation, the fact is the legislature votes together about 98% of the time or so. Did that surprise you when you got up there?
Not really. It seems like when we really put our focus on what's best for Kansans, we tend to do what we need to do. And oftentimes we find that we do reach across the aisle. I know that for me personally, I've managed to talk to at least one person in every committee that I meet and that I'm a member of, to get to know them a little bit beyond the committee means, so that we know a little bit more about each other and can find those commonalities.
Do you think it'll be easier once we are past some of the pandemic restrictions, though?
I think that will be easier, but I think we're still going to be looking at what we can do to make sure that our focus is not on those wedge issues that really don't have a whole lot to do with the people of Kansas, but we need to make sure that we keep our focus on what we can do to improve those living conditions for everybody here.
Yeah. Well, very interesting, and I've loved the conversation here, and a lot of that really is what we aim to do here with this show as well, is let's talk about the issues, and that's exactly what we've done today. Thank you both so much, Stephanie and Susan. I've enjoyed our discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at Cake News, KSN News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. We'd love to hear what you think. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, stay safe and have a great week.